righty. Well, today I'm actually going to talk to you about the importance of establishing trust in emergency management. And as all good emergency managers do, we always have a guidebook. I'm actually going to start with my guidebook for life, and it comes in the context of Sue's isms. But I'm going to start with a great little quote and a poem from Dr. Seuss's One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. And it says, cherish diversity. We see them come, we see them go. Some are fast and some are slow. Some are high and some are low. Not one of them is like another. Don't ask why. Go ask your mother. So with that, I wanted to start with this funny poem. If you all know me, or if you've ever had the privilege to be in any of our trainings, I have a lot of Sadie isms, and I probably learned them from my guidebook, Sue's isms. Oh, all right. Well, establishing trust and credibility amongst the whole community is essential in building a true inclusive emergency management program. Now, I didn't realize how many issues and influences from the past and present play such a strong role in the ability for people when disasters strike. But this happened to help me when we were doing a training called Language Inclusion in Emergency Management. And we had to do this exercise, and I wasn't sure I could value the exercise. So I was like, I don't understand why we even have to do this exercise, but I'm going to share it with you. We had to make this poem, and what it is you start this poem and you start talking about, I am from. And so I started doing my poem and I said, oh, I am from a time in life when I was just a child and I was very, very sick. And I told my mama I was sick and I didn't feel good. And she felt me and I was burning up. Now, my mom worked in an emergency department for the hospital and knew that my temperature was way too high and I should probably seek medical attention. However, we did not have insurance. And we did not have the money to pay to go to a doctor. So my mama told me, please get into this bath. I need to pull your temperature down. And honey, we do not have the money to go to the doctor. But I know after you take this bath, you're going to feel better. I am from a time that I had to sit at the special reading table until I was in 4th grade. And I was able to spend the special time with the special teacher to help me learn how to read because of my undiagnosed learning disability. I do have to give thanks to Dr. Seuss because after I started learning how to organize Dr. Seuss's rhyming words, it actually helped me start talking or start reading. I am from having 2 little fur children that I would risk no matter what to save their lives, even if it may jeopardize mine. So that poem, I didn't understand what the purpose was that we had to have that inside had to do this little exercise inside this training. But later on, I would, as we finished that training. It actually took me back to that public health emergency response, that public health emergency called COVID. I don't know if any of you remember, that happened a way long time ago, right? 4 years ago, actually took over the world and a lot of our time and a lot of us responding to it. And I was learning, I was getting baptized through fire. I mean, baptized through COVID response. Both are damaging disasters, but you sure get baptized quickly when that happens. Well, the mission for that COVID response was save as much vulnerable populations. And I was like, vulnerable populations? Who are vulnerable populations? I'm not even sure what that means. Who has the label of who are vulnerable populations? And I didn't also realize that how past disasters and other community history have influence on such trust when this bad emergency and disaster was happening. But I did know that a lot of disability communities are normally left behind. And I did know, coming from my former employment, working with the Center for Independent Living, that disability advocates are nothing about us without us. They have a mantra that helps us stay included. What that means is plan with me, not just for me, because you don't know what I don't know, because you don't have my lived experience. And then I also knew that a lot of the headlines, I've been following them all the way back to Katrina. And so many of the headlines that I see after disasters are many people can physically flee disasters, can't physically flee disasters. Too often we fail them. The majority of disabled people never go home after disasters. 38% did not evacuate because they had a disability or were caring for individuals with the disability, as CBS News reported. After Hurricane Harvey, disaster relief efforts are failing people with disabilities again. In California wildfires, disabled people may be left behind. Camp Fire, many who died in California wildfire were disabled elderly. Could they have been saved? And what I knew also is that a lot of times people with disabilities are not able to access their life-saving resources, such as resources that are people, places, or things. That's how I think of resources. And for the first time in my life, and mind you, in 2024, I was a 48-year-old woman, already getting a lifetime of experience, but I had never heard of this label called BIPOC, BIPOC. And I had to ask one of my mentors, what on earth is BIPOC? And they identified to me that it means Black, Indigenous, people of color. And I was like, oh, I have a label BIPOC that I never identified as, even though I am a person of color. I'm from a Latino background, a Mexican-American family. And also I started going, I wonder why it's so important that the people that are identified under vulnerable populations, which we identified were people who were Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as people who had disabilities, not all disabilities, but those who are at higher risk of dying from COVID, such as people who have diabetes, and those who had different areas of disabilities that were specific to having a higher risk of dying from COVID, such as people who had high blood pressure, who suffer from high blood pressure, and others that normally don't identify with the label. Simultaneously, during that time, we started having civil unrest. It was igniting simultaneously as COVID was happening as well. I also started hearing a lot about language justice. And what was language justice? Well, it's also considered having the digital divide that was happening with our aging community members that don't normally use those smartphones that we all sign up for receiving emergency alerts for them. There was a lot of different things like in that language justice that was misinformation and disinformation. And a lot of that was coming from trusted organizations in the community as well. We also saw that the need of ASL interpreters and governor's briefs, that is language justice. And we saw that the majority of our older community members are the majority of our media consumers. And so those are the formats that people are able to receive their communication resources in the best way they understand it. And their poem, when we offer this information in the formats that we have, their poem says, I am from where I am valued because you are giving me the information in the way that I best understand it. And other influencers and issues that we're having, that were based on past segmentation laws and other past leaders, influencers. For instance, my auntie was talking to my mom and telling my mom that, hey, I don't believe in this virus and I don't think we should have to wear masks. And, you know, my church doesn't even believe in this. And so my mom was challenging back to me, who is working in emergency management, who is asking my mother to please be sure she does the precautions, because she is an aging community member who is high at risk of dying from COVID. And my father, who has diabetes, who does not identify as a person with a disability or a person with an access and functional needs, I wanted him to be safe as well. So please trust in me as I trust in you, Mom, to take care of me because you love me most. So please make sure that even though you're getting influenced by another loved one in your family, please try to do this for me. Those segmented laws and other leader influencers, they're also tied in at times in government, in communities, neighbors, families, policies, or even politics. Those past laws, such as redlining, can get in the way of getting vital resources. Like what I just learned in May when I went to a volunteer organizations active in disasters national conference. I went to a breakout called When the Sidewalks Boil, and it was talking about some of those past laws that happened in the area where when they get these extreme heats, that people who live in lower socioeconomic, who do not have access to businesses because there's a business desert in their area that they can normally go to get air conditioning or heating, where there's no trees because the trees at one point were planted to help people with more affluent, people who have more affluent means or affluent income, to have these bigger trees that help lower temperatures at least and help people get shade in those areas. And then those people who live in those areas didn't have ownership of transportation resources in order to even drive themselves to and from where there is a cooling center or cooling resources. And so a lot of because they lived in a more low income area as well. And many of the people who lived there were aging community members as well. And so those influencers and past situations really impacted people's ability to get access to those vital resources of being able to cool down. And then we also saw in Katrina some of those past influencers, like depending at times on the color of people's skin, on those who would get a floating case of water would be considered either resourceful or looting. And it would depended on who the viewer was, as well as the color of the person's skin at times. We also go back to the heat wave in 1995, where influential leaders who voiced publicly a disagreement with the subject matter experts on the recommendations, and then they had a disconnect amongst their community members. And many of our aging community members and people of color were dying because of the extreme heat. This also happened in one of our local counties where the commissioners in COVID, where our commissioners were getting upset that public health was giving out this information as they were supporting our seasonal farm workers who were trying to ensure that our farm workers had people, place, and thing resources, and they were getting to them. And then, but with that, we were able to come together and bring the commissioners and those who were providing the services to the community members to be able to find the importance of those community members getting critical information, the critical information that COVID positive and what that means. Because in Spanish, positive means a good thing when you translate it into English. So when you're translating it from Spanish to English, COVID positive, that's a good thing. You should get COVID positive. However, the information was not that. And so those organizations that were providing information to those farm workers had to go in and give them the correct information in the format that they best understand. That COVID positive was not and what would be helpful to help with not spreading the virus more amongst each other, the other workers and their family members. Also, the ability of how to get some of those COVID tests and their personal protective equipment. I also think about how the civil unrest opened a new chapter in my life and made me need to seek to understand a lot stronger. Because this is when the rise of what is, I needed to understand what is Black Lives Matter. Of course, Black Lives Matter. All lives matter, right? Oh, what I learned what Black Lives Matter means is that, you know what, being a person who is Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, we have stories and lived experiences that matter. And they should be able to be listened to and be able to be thought about in order for me to be able to access my resources, my support services and safety resources when bad things happen. That helped me be able to understand also when I was at that same national organizations active in disaster conference, when I heard the stories of our indigenous stories about how a lot of the influences of past policies and laws have taken away a lot of their culture. That matters. That matters in the way that we respond to and provide people, place, and thing resources to our community. I also shared that sometimes I didn't realize that my story about not having insurance and not having the money to go to a doctor was really a story about my story matters, because that influences my ability again to be able to get the resources needed. It also taught me, I didn't even know this, but I thought all people had to when stopped by law enforcement, you put your hands on the steering wheel. And I thought all people were trained to do that. During the time of my seek to understand about what stories mattered, is that I did learn that not all community and not all people are taught that as a life-saving practice. That hit myself and one of my co-workers very hard, because we were both from people of color families. We were shocked that not everybody did that. We had to also own that as well. Well, as I shared all these different examples of issues and influencers that could come and break trust in community, we have to ask ourselves, why is that really important in emergency management? Well, what's important in emergency management is that we need to be able to understand that our local communities may have policies that are causing this influence in our communities. We also need to identify what programs are already in our community that work with community members that we're able to work with to get information to and from that can save, that we can, and also resources, those people, place, and thing resources to and from the community members. We think about even promotoras. Those are public health workers in Spanish that support, a lot of times they support our seasonal farm workers. And then we also had those promotoras helping us find information and ability to talk language that we hadn't heard of before in COVID, such as cabal. And this cabal, it was not a written form. It was also not a spoken form. It was actually more of a tribal form of communicating. And so at least we had somebody who could translate the information. So people were getting the information that can help save lives. But this also goes beyond emergency management, but it could direct support services available in our communities. The second point here is it's not our job to fix these influencers and issues in emergency management, but it is our job to be aware of it, because not being aware of it, it could get in the way of people being able to access their vital resources of people, places, and things, such as communication resources, their maintaining health and medical resources, their independence resources, their support services and safety resources, and their transportation resources. Those are resources that are so important for accessing when bad days happen or disaster strikes. You know, my third point is in emergency management, we're a bunch of good people doing good things. We need to work through our trusted community members, our community connectors, our community liaisons, our partners, our cultural brokers, to be able to serve our communities before, during, and after emergencies and disasters. And we need to test and exercise it and not wait until the bad day to do this or when a disaster occurs. So as I conclude here, I want to remind us that the importance of establishing trust in emergency management. We shared why it's important in emergency management. We shared that it's not our job to fix these issues or influencers in emergency management, but it is our job to be aware of it, to help ensure everyone can get access to CMIST, I'm sorry. I said an acronym, CMIST, to communication resources, maintaining health and medical resources, independence resources, support services and safety resources, and transportation resources. And we are a bunch of good people doing good things. We gotta learn from people with lived experience what we don't know, because we don't know. So as I revisit what I really want to convey from this message is establishing trust and credibility amongst the whole community is essential to building a truly inclusive emergency management program. COVID and my role here at the States is helping us to include our community champions to ensure nobody is left behind when a disaster strikes or a bad day happens. We work with our local community connectors, liaisons, advocates, and those who are doing the work on a regular basis and have trust in the community they serve to be our emergency management force multipliers. And as I recently heard from a quote, it went something like this: the leaders and helpers should look like and be from the communities they are leading and helping. Thank you, June Kales, for sharing that quote. It also helps us when we work with those community champions that they could help us with solving our feeding and sheltering of people. Because honestly, when a bad day happens and I have to evacuate to a shelter, home is where the shelter is in an emergency and a disaster. So I need those resources that I had at home to be able to keep maintain my health and my safety when I'm at that shelter. It could also help us be honest on what we can and cannot do in our communities. It helps us have the community help us solve those problems or those resource gaps. It also helps us include our animal family members, because honestly, when a bad day happens, fur children, in my life, my fur children will not be left behind. They're as equally important as my children to me. And I will risk my life by not evacuating if my fur children are not allowed to go to the place that they are not welcomed or allowed to the places that I need to evacuate from. Because I cannot live with knowing I left them behind. It helps us move beyond registries and helps us plan like FEMA is not coming. Because to be honest, FEMA cannot arrive when the bad day happens, right at the day that the bad day happens. So we need to prepare our community members and communities to prepare together for all of our resource disruptions and be able to help us so that we don't have to always rely on FEMA coming to save us. This also helps with our migrants and those seeking asylum, also those who are undocumented, because their lives still matter when a disaster strikes in emergency management. Because our mission in emergency management is to save lives regardless of any labels, any socioeconomic status, any religion, any disability, or other identifiers. It ensures resources get to the affected community members. It helps us plan with, respond to, and help communities recover from disasters. So what I want right now is to have a call to action for you all as community members, as champions, as emergency managers, to please find the leaders and the helpers in your communities, and let's force multiply in emergency and disaster preparedness together so that no one is left behind. Now, this takes me back to that activity I started with, the activity from the language inclusion emergency management. And I think of my I Am From poem exercise that we did. And now I see what the value of that poem was and what the value for emergency management is. Because you could take that activity, when you take that activity, you now can see and work on the empathy in emergency management. It'll also have you in emergency management be able to reflect on times of how important you felt when you felt included, or how unimportant you felt when you were not included. It also gives you the value of including others in your planning. Now, as I think of my poem and what it looks like today after I did that exercise, my poem goes a little like this now. I am from My Story Matters. I am from a family of bunch of good people trying to do good things. I am from being my Mira's grandmother, that she calls Nani, and who is Mira's best friend. All right, maybe Mira's my best friend, but one day I hope to earn being her best friend. And yesterday, I want to echo what Vance shared about what drew him to this work. I would like to ask you all to write your own I Am From poem and to reflect on where you are from and what parts of your story have been impacted by trust, community, and inclusion, or not. And use these stories to write in your own life to help you identify why establishing trust and credibility amongst the whole community is essential to building a truly inclusive emergency management program. Now with that, I need to go back to my guidebook and I need to go back to one final poem. And it goes from Dr. Seuss's Never Underestimate the Power of One. A person's a person, no matter how small. That comes from the Horton Hears a Who. But also a poem that says, don't be afraid to accept help. I floated 12 days without toothpaste or soap. I practically almost given up hope. When someone up high shouted, "Here, catch this rope." Then I knew that my troubles had come to an end, and I climbed up the rope calling, "Thank you, my friend." That comes from I Had Trouble in Getting a Solo Swallow. With that, thank you all for your time with listening for the importance of building trust in emergency management. All right, with that, I would like to now move us into our next panel as we get ready to have our next panel present. The next panel is called Establishing Trust and Credibility. Where they're going to be talking about establishing trust and credibility amongst the whole community and how it is essential to building a truly inclusive emergency management program. The panelists will discuss innovative methods, processes, and programs to integrate emergency management systems and build resilience while generating the buy-in amongst the whole community. With that, I'm going to introduce the moderator for that panel, which is Ron Prater. Ron Prater is the Executive Director of Big City Emergency Management. And if you'd like to know more about his bio, please visit the link where we could see more about who Mark Prater is in his bio. Off to you, Ron. I'm sorry, did I hope I said Ron, because I got...
That's okay. You can call me anything you want, Sadie. That was a great opening. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to welcome my other panelists. I think we're going to join now as well. I'll give them a second to get in. Amy, good morning. Aaron. Roxy. And I think Julian. Excellent. All right. Well, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. You know, it's days like today that I remember how great my life is when I get to not only hear Sadie open up, but also get to work with these amazing panelists. Sadie, thank you for your opening. And I definitely think I'm going to steal your I am from poem idea in the future, if you don't mind. Don't worry, I will give you credit. Once again, I'm Ron Prater, and I will serve as the moderator for today's panel on establishing trust and credibility. As many of you are aware, establishing trust and credibility among the whole community is essential to building a truly inclusive emergency management program. And as you also know, trust is hard to gain, but very easy to lose. It takes effort to build trust and credibility, and our panels will provide you some ideas and tools you can use as you leave today's session. Now, before we get started, just a little bit about me before I introduce the panelists. I currently serve as both the Executive Director of Big City Emergency Managers, and I am a co-founder of Bent Ear Solutions. Big City Emergency Managers, or BCM, as we refer to it, if you're not familiar with us, is a not-for-profit that includes the directors of emergency management from 15 of the largest jurisdictions in the country. Together, these emergency managers serve over 20% of our nation's population. I'm a middle-aged, well, I like to think my kids will say I'm old, Caucasian of medium build, wearing a gray BCEM quarter zip. While not bald, I am very close and probably should just say I'm bald, be easier. If you've had a chance to review the bios of the panelists today, I'm sure you are very impressed, as I was, and I am. I will say that you have an amazing panel of experts that cover a wide array of real experiences and perspective related to our topic today. First, we'll start with brief introductions by each of the panelists. Roxy, I'm going to go to you first.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Really excited for this discussion. So I am the FEMA Region 9 Disability Integration Specialist, and I've been in this position 8 years, though I've been with FEMA for almost 19 years. I've served in a range of positions, though the last 11 years have been in the equity space, specifically in disability integration. So as the Regional Disability Integration Specialist, I'm in the unique position to have my responsibilities focus a lot around building relationships. I'm the only disability integration advisor with FEMA in the region. So it's just me, Roxy, party of one, for California, Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, and the Pacific Territories of Guam, CNMI, and American Samoa. It is a huge area, and we're really active in the disaster space. So the relationships that I have with my state AFN coordinators, with disability community partners, emergency managers, and within FEMA They're the key to this, to successfully including people with disabilities in disaster planning and response, and most importantly, in recovery. Without these partnerships, Roxy Party of One would not be successful in bringing disability inclusion to that disaster space. So I've had to rely on my partners and my peers in this space, and they rely on me many times over the last few years, but especially recently, as disasters are really just ramping up, and the level of complexity in evacuation and sheltering, and especially in the last few years, long-term housing and recovery, like what we're doing in Maui, become tight spaces with a lot of competition for resources. So the level of trust built in non-disaster times has been the backbone of open and honest communication and affecting change in the way things are done to include whole community. And these relationships, not always easy. We work in really intense situations. And so being able to have trust in each other's intentions, in our knowledge, and understanding the limitations posed by what it is that we do as well, have really cemented our ability to work together. And I am excited to get to talk about some of that today with all of you. So I will hand it back to Ron. Thank you. Great meeting, everyone.
Thank you. Roxy, Party of One, I imagine you have a lot of airline miles. Amy, you're next.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Amy Voth-Siebert. I use she, her pronouns, and I am pleased to be the Disaster Behavioral Health and Inclusion Program Manager within the Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response here in Colorado's State Public Health Department. Colorado means that I get to be a colleague, a learner, and a collaborator with Sadie and her amazing team. So that is a true privilege of my work these days. But as you think about my position, disaster behavioral health focused on the mental health, the substance use needs, concerns, treatment, and recovery journeys that people go on. We want that to be integrated well with a whole health approach, which our Department of Public Health has responsibility for health-related disruptions when they happen at that state level of response. But we also have been working on this area of access and functional needs for a good time in our program, because both behavioral health, how people respond psychosocially to big disruptions, to overwhelm, to stress, and the resources we need in order to function, protect our communication, our health, our independence, our safety supports and services, and our transportation access. All of those things are about people's functioning during disasters. So really having a people-centric, human-focused lens on emergency management is a big part of where my professional work and the collaborations across many different emergency management disciplines have been leading me. And I will also share that I am a white woman in my mid-30s, and I am not always the person who has the trust and the immediate community lived experience and connection of different people. And so I know the criticality of decentering myself, decentering the work that I do, and really coming to understand what it is that amazing community partners and just community energy is doing on a regular basis, and how do we incorporate more of that into our situations and assumptions, our knowledge about how we approach disasters as not something in a vacuum, isolated from what happens on a regular basis, but informed by those people-based pieces of information, connections, what Aaron Titus often calls the constellations of our communities, and really knowing and using those in disasters. I do have, if a visual description is helpful, a navy blue blazer on, and I have hair that is longer on one side than the other, because the other place that I've been doing intense access and functional needs learning recently is I'm a newly minted parent. And so learning about access and functional needs that come with different seasons of life, new roles as someone caregiving a baby who eats different things than I do, who needs, different types of health and care and resources, has really humbled me in terms of learning about resources that I didn't know was there to begin with. And I think that all of us kind of go on that journey when we are both personally impacted by access and functional needs, but also when we are trying to respect the differences in access and functional needs that we have across different communities. So I'll wrap up my introduction there and hand that back to you, Ron.
Perfect, Amy. Thank you. Aaron, over to you.
Ron, great to see you today. Thanks so much for putting together this great panel with Roxy and Amy and Julian. It's really an honor to be here. Hello, everyone. I'm Aaron Carruthers. I'm a child of parents with developmental and other disabilities. I'm a person with disabilities myself, and I'm a parent of a child, a young man with disabilities. I'm also the executive director of California's State Council on Developmental Disabilities. I am a white male, right around 50, maybe above, maybe below, I'll never tell. I've got silver hair, I'm wearing clear frame glasses, I have a blue suit, a white shirt, and a blue tie, and behind me is a filter of the Disability Pride flag. I am the State Council on Developmental Disabilities is an entity that's created by Congress. We are a line item in Congress's budget, and there is a Developmental Disabilities Council in every state and territory. So if you're connected to any US state or territory, there is a counterpart, a sister council in your location. Want to give a hello and a shout out to Vicki Davidson, who's in the audience today, one of my colleagues from Missouri, who was executive director of the Missouri DD Council. The DD councils exist in federal law and funded by Congress to find barriers that keep people with developmental disabilities living fully integrated lives in the community. This philosophy came out really as an evolution of what used to be, well, at the time, it was the most enlightened, smartest idea, the best thing you could possibly do for people with developmental disabilities, which was to take them away from their families and put them in institutions and never see them again. While that was the best, most enlightened thinking of the time, about 140 years ago, humans evolved, we've evolved, and what's best has evolved. So DD councils were created about 55 years ago to make community inclusion. Even though that thinking of institutionalization happened 140 years ago, the vestiges of it exist in systems and in services and in mindsets. And every day we're still working to undo that model of institutionalization, which actually evolved into a medical model, which was the best, brightest, most enlightened idea of the time. But that still also needs to evolve into a community model. So I really appreciate this conversation, Ron, because this is a conversation about trust. And trust is a community exercise. It is what does it mean to be in the community, of the community, listened to by the community, and have your needs met by the community and where you need them. The State Council in our work in California, we do our work we begin our work as an exercise in trust by asking the community, what do you want us to work on for the next 5 years? So every 5 years, we make a state plan. And we've seen the needs of emergency preparation and response increase over the years as climate change has increased. But our work is in employment and education and housing and everything it means to live a full life as a person. I'm really, really proud of our small and mighty team. There's about 50 of us in California at the DD Council, spread across 13 locations. And last year, our small little team of 50, we impacted 5.9 million Californians through improving policies, removing statutory and regulatory barriers. We're face-to-face and Zoom-to-Zoom with over 84,000 people. We worked with 850 community partners. Believe me, I'm going to come back to that point as we talk about how to build trust in the community. Advised about 5,200 people individually, one-on-one, on how to solve their problems. Brought about almost 20,000 people into trainings and groups. and held almost 2,000 targeted activities to bridge disparities and delivered those in 14 languages. So we're proud of our impact, and we're proud and very grateful to be part of today's conversation. Thanks, Ron.
Aaron, excellent. Thank you for that introduction. And Julian.
Hello, good morning, team. Good morning, Ron. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, well, and good morning, everyone, and good morning to the panelists as well. Well, my name is Julian Ochoa. I'm the manager for Disability Access and Functional Needs and Vulnerable Population of the City of Houston. It is a new initiative that we have been working for over a year. I am a former diplomat from United Nations. United Nations, I've been assigning in two different areas, in Vienna, in Austria, and also in United Nations Paris, UNESCO, for several years. I'm a former international attorney from the Legal Committee of the United Nations, working specifically in the Human Rights Committee and Resilience Committee. And in my years here in USA, I have been working with several non-profit organizations like Baker Ripley, for example, which is one of the oldest, with more than 120 years in Houston, and different organizations, Harris County as well, and now about 3 years, since 3 years, I've been leading, the new project, the new initiative for the city of Houston as a manager of this program, manager for the disability access and functional need and vulnerable population, and we are working on the implementation of the STIP.
Julian, thank you very much. And also, I know you are actively still responding and recovering from the hurricane. So thank you for breaking out today to help us out.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Before I go to the first question on trust and credibility, I'd like to remind you all to post questions if you have them. I will do my best to get to all of them, but certainly can't guarantee that given time. But we will certainly do our best to answer your questions real time. To set up today's panel, I just want to explain a little bit. We're going to start with a little bit about where we are today, where we feel we are today in terms of trust. We'll go into some examples of how these great panelists have worked to build trust in their communities. And time permitting, we may even talk about some places where trust or credibility did not exist. I'm a firm believer that we learn a lot more from our failures or our hiccups, so to speak, than we do from our successes. So time to jump into the first question for the panelists. I'm going to start with Roxy. So the question, and it's kind of a two-part question, excuse me. You may have already kind of jumped into some of this. So Roxy, why are the terms trust and credibility important in your work and in your role? And what do you feel like the status of trust is today?
Thanks, Ron. We'll start with the first part of that question. Trust and credibility are so important. I'm more important than almost anything else. I talk in trainings that I give, and I joke that I work for the federal government. So not everybody trusts me, right? Especially not my community partners. My relationship with disability community partners can be the difference between life and death. If I say the shelter is physically accessible and the community members don't know me, first of all, how am I reaching them? And secondly, what do I know? I am the federal government. So if I really need to get out emergency information to communities, the best way to do it is by utilizing trusted resources and understanding that I know in doing that, their reputation with the individuals they serve is on the line. I only get one chance, and I have to know the information that I'm giving them, that I'm asking them to share is credible and is correct. That trust, it goes both directions. It's not possible without having built trust and credibility with these partners in the before times. I have a saying that I live by in all aspects of my work. When you need a friend, it's too late to make one. I say this to my kids all the time. It's something that really emphasizes for me the need to do that long-term work and to build those relationships. I can't expect to just show up when the going is getting and the fire is raging and just say, you could trust me, or to say, I need your help. I need you to do things for me. If we aren't already friends, I'm just another person out here asking you for something or telling you something in the long line of people asking and telling in these types of events. Long-term engagement always is the best practice. If we have a chance to establish relationships and build trust through small actions, we're going to be able to be more open and honest with each other, and know that we can count on the information that's being exchanged. I get asked a lot during the trainings I was talking about. They're the inclusive emergency planning training courses. I get asked how to get in with the disability community. And I hear a lot, we invite them and they don't show up, so they must not really want to work with us. Or they're hostile towards us every time we ask them to come to meetings or participate in exercises or be victims in our trainings, and they decline. So how can we work with these people when they don't want to work with us? And I say the same thing every time. You have to show up. Have you attended their meetings? Have you met them where they're at? Have you asked them how you can help or support or participate in their scheduled activities? It doesn't take much to show up for people. And historically, organizations that serve people with disabilities have not had the best experiences with government, with first responders, with emergency management. And so we have to show up first. We can't just expect people to show up for us. Our partners are most often short-staffed, underfunded, overworked, and it doesn't establish trust to only be asking for things. Come to our meeting, help us with our plans, show up at our exercises. When you send an invite for something and you really need to ask them to participate, have you included an accommodation statement so that everybody knows that they'll be able to participate and how to request an accommodation to be able to participate? Have you advertised that or identified that the space that you'll be meeting in or the event is physically accessible? And do you mean it? Have you partnered with organizations locally to better understand what physical access needs are if that's not something that you actually know how to do? Those are the types of things that begin, those small steps that begin that long-term kind of effort to establish that credibility and trust. And it is beyond important to show up for people, to show up, to do your homework, and to show that you care. If I haven't shown up, I can't expect them to do so. It means everything in terms of success when the chips are down and when things are hard. You know, I can have a heated debate with Vance Taylor from California. I can disagree with Heather Lafferty from Nevada, but I know that what we've built over years won't let us down. And they know that they can count on me to be there and to be honest. And we can have those difficult conversations about what to do next because we've established these long-term relationships. As for the second part of your question, Ron, about starting from a good foundation, I think it comes and goes with the weather. Personally, FEMA life is like all around the weather, right? But like I said earlier, I work for the federal government, so it could be a stable foundation or not, depending on the current political climate, general public opinion, how people feel about how the last disaster went for them or for others. I know it was a little bit more of a struggle to be quickly welcomed following some major events some years ago after Hurricanes Harvey and Irma and Maria. When I said I worked for FEMA, it wasn't necessarily the same congenial response as I get right now, right? But the idea of long-term, it does play a role here though too. If you've been showing up, if you've built a reputation for yourself, if the people that you work with can vouch for you when someone says, do you know Roxy? And they can say, yeah, partner with Roxy, she's wild. You may be able to get started kind of with a leg up, right? But there's just so many different factors at play. In the last couple of years, there's been that increased focus on equity and inclusion. And I think it makes a better place to begin from. People are more open to these conversations. as a disability community partner, you're kind of a hot commodity right now. People want to work with you. They want to engage because they want to better understand how they can serve the community in a more inclusive way. Agencies, organizations, companies, everybody's looking to partner to build that capacity. And as an emergency manager or a first responder, it goes a long way in starting to make those friendships before you need them. To be showing up and expressing a genuine desire to build those partnerships and trust with the community. That's really starting with the best, most stable foundation. Thanks, Ron.
Rocky, that was outstanding. And when you write your leadership book, I hope you call it Show Up. I get to work with a lot of leaders all across the country, and they haven't used that phrase, but that's what they've insinuated is the people that they value the most are the people that show up. All right, Amy, to you, what are the terms trust and credibility? How are those important in your work? And what do you think the status of that is today?
Oh my gosh, Roxy, I just want to like in some ways say ditto to what you just said. The ability to show up without an agenda, right? And to start from a place of wanting to listen, of wanting to just understand what conditions are, because right, disasters are meant to be exceptional. For those of us who've been in the world for a while, it feels like they're coming on more and more frequently, and they kind of have to be a part of like everything we think about. But in a lot of ways, disasters are meant to be exceptional. They're not where we start from. We start from what is in our communities on a regular basis. And I think understanding that and having a vested interest in what works well, but also what gaps are from the starting point, really informs how we can leverage disasters in some way. Like the saying goes, never waste a good disaster. Leverage disasters to think about novel and like innovative ways to do things better, rather than having a disaster environment exacerbate the inequalities, the lack of access, the things that are problems on a regular basis. But you can only do that by showing up and paying attention and caring about conditions that maybe go beyond the bailiwick of your particular role and responsibility and organization. So yeah, just being curious and invested in community understanding, I think, is a huge starting place. And I think I always go back to behavior, right? We can plan as systems and organizations until the cows come home. But if our community does not trust the systems to seek the services and resources that they're providing, or they don't understand how we are asking them to participate in the operations and the supports that we are generating for disaster environments, a lot of our efforts may not connect, and a lot of that planning will feel really ineffective. The efficacy of the plans will be compromised, and the community won't benefit during a time of great need. And I think we see examples of that in sort of a lot of different places, whether it's, not seeking shelter from, organizations that are affiliated, sometimes with law enforcement, sometimes with government, sometimes with even nonprofit entities that don't have strong reputations with particular facets of our communities. Knowing that the experience that somebody had the last time a disaster hit will inform the way they think about what is going to be available to me and what is going to be my experience in the next disaster. Like we have, as humans, sort of storytelling ways of capturing really overwhelming experiences. And what are the stories that people tell about the last one? Because that's going to be one of the things that we grow from the next time things come in. And have we, when there is a lack of trust that, for instance, critical access resources will be provided, there's this mentality that like, they're not talking to me. You're not inviting me to this shelter. So have we, as Roxy, you were just saying, noted accommodations that will be made available, or had very like front and center the way to request them when something is being needed? If sorry, my brain can go in a lot of different directions, but those entities with trust and credibility will be who the community members turn to anyway. And so I think another really important part about understanding trust and credibility, thinking about it in disaster work, is saying, are we capacitizing? Have we resourced those entities who do understand and coordinate for disaster response? Because, not to preempt one of the questions that's coming up, Ron, but if you think about the phrase whole community planning or whole community preparedness, the reality is, in some ways, we have turned emergency management into a very professionalized space in some ways, but whole community work really says, have we invested in the emergency management knowledge and practice and training and opportunity, not just for those of us who have like a title or a job position that takes us in that way and the funding that, you know, comes along with it, but have we really driven some of our programs to again, capacitize and resource those entities who understand and coordinate within the community on a regular basis. I'll pause there.
Amy, that's great. We're going to come back to that capacity issue in a little bit, because I want to pull that one a little bit, pull that thread a little bit. Aaron, can you talk about where we are in trust and credibility today?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. And I love coming to events like this and panels like this, because there's always nuggets you get and they just stick with you. And Roxy, the one that's already sticking with me, and if you could just repeat it, because I want to get it right, but it's the time that you need a friend is not the time to make a friend. How does it go?
When you need a friend, it's too late to make one. That's my motto.
Friend, it's too late to make one. That perfectly captures probably about an hour's worth of content, I was going to say. So perfect. Thank you. The question about like the status of trust today, Ron, I think is a really interesting one, because that's what's summarized in it. When you need a friend, it's too late to make one. Trust, I'm going to state, I'll put out there, trust is in motion in society. We're living in a time where trust is in flux. It's changing. And we try to measure it. Like, isn't that wild? Humans are wild. We try to measure something like trust, which is a feeling. It's something built over time. It's something you should never ask for, but something you should only ever earn. But we still try to measure it. And I think that's important. And there's good information looking from the poll. There's a poll of the Partnership for Public Service who've been tracking trust in federal government over time. And the numbers are really striking. And they're striking in how quickly they're changing. Really, the question is like, do you trust the federal government? And in 2022, the number said, yes, I trust the federal government, was 35%. And in 2024, 23%. Yes, I trust the federal government. Well, would you be so strong as to say you do not trust the federal government? In 2022, 46% said, I do not trust the federal government. And in 2024, that went up to 63%. And looking at, there's definitely, as you can already predict, a political ideological breakdown, though it's never really high among anybody. There's a racial breakdown, and that might defy some of the logic a little bit. But the racial demographic that they track that has the least amount of trust in government is white Caucasian respondents. But it's a big question. Do you trust the federal government? It's kind of like a disembodied big idea, something we always kind of strike out against anyway. So when you get a little bit, just one level further, what do you trust the government to do? Actually, the highest ranking was keeping me safe. Wasn't that high. It was 2022 was 45%, and 2024 was 47%. It actually increased. So overall trust decreasing sharply, but I trust the federal government to keep me safe went up out of the pandemic times up to 47%. Now, we in emergency preparedness know 47% means half of who needs our help during life-threatening situations may or may not trust what's being come to them. But what's interesting is that this measure, again, is just focused on federal government and federal services. And that makes sense in our conversation, because that's where the majority of the dollars, the organization, the chain of command, the structure, the resource, the deployment is coming through emergency times through the federal government. I will hold, and I have nothing to back this up. I'll tell you right now, I have nothing to back this up, but I will hold. Trust isn't eroding. Trust isn't decreasing. Trust is actually just going to different places. I used to have a higher trust in federal government. Now I have a higher trust in my friends or in social media or my informal networks. And I think that the state of trust, as you asked about it, Ron, is actually in flux. We're human. We need to trust. It's literally like a social biological need. We need to trust who's with us. It just used to have a stronger concentration within places we can measure, like the federal government. Now it's sort of diffused and it's in different places. So when we're looking at why trust and credibility is important, and why I think you even decided, yes, we should have a panel on this, is because what we're trying to do in today's conversation is figure out how to capture, find where that trust is being diffused to, so people can still stay safe when needed. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Aaron. Julian, state of trust today in your world. Your turn.
Yes, I think that let me, because I have problem with my communication here with my speaker. Can you hear me?
We can hear you great.
Okay, great. They fixed it, the IT. And I'm sorry, I was attending calls as well. As you know, right now we're facing, the afterward of the Beryl storm, and just to let you know, the impact was huge, even more than Ike storm. At the Ike storm at that time, we had about a million people affected. I mean, like without electricity, and now we have almost 3 million people without electricity. So I think really complicated. But the question is amazing. I think that especially in those cases like nowadays we're facing here in Houston, is where the outcome of the credibility and trust shows up. We cannot build any strategy. Maybe we can plan. We can plan an emergency plan. We can plan different strategies, but without the core, which is the trust and credibility, the plans are just simple papers. Doesn't matter the language, doesn't matter the accent, doesn't matter the color, at the end are just paper. So in our way of thinking here in Houston, we try to think in an innovative way, and for example, through our experience, or in my case, before I was working here in Houston as a director of government affairs and community outreach, and then they offered me the opportunity to lead our new initiative, to create a plan for the city of Houston that cover the disability access and functional need and vulnerable population. And the first challenge that we faced at that time was the trust and credibility. And that happened the same thing with the other city plans. We have 24 city plans, and we had to update all of them last year. We have been working almost 2 years, to update the 24 city plans, and almost a year to create the access and functional need City of Houston new plan. But during the creation, we were discussing several times how we provide life to those documents, how we really create a document that emphasize and can project the real need of each community. The core was your question: building trust and credibility with the community. It is the key that will help us, through the trust and credibility, gather the real need and fulfill our plans, our city plans, our city policies with the actual need. Through that, there will be an engagement. Why? Because the people will be civically engaged, taking into consideration that every plan before, during, or after disaster will project the need of every neighborhood. So we developed our strategy, and we realized that the most important was to create the plan, but at the same time work and break up the challenge barrier of the language through an aggressive engagement campaign. And as you know, it's not easy. It's not easy. You cannot build trust and credibility in just a few months. You know, it's a work in progress. It's all the time. And what we did is we have been working, and I've been leading this initiative since I was working in Nation in Paris. We have an strategy, we call it asset-based community development. What we do is we work with the same values, with the same strength of the people in the own neighborhood to start to build like a Gothic cathedral, rock over rock, taking in consideration the real skills, values, and strength of the whole community. How we do that? We create a plan for engagement, and then working in the field all the time. Working in the field all the time, doing a lot of meetings for over a year, Saturday, Sunday, attending to the churches, because it's different when you try to make a relationship through the stakeholder of the community. I think it's a good idea, but in our case, we believe more like, okay, we have those networking, but we work with them. We don't work for them. We work with them, you know, side by side in the field. And from there is the only way that we think that we can build leadership and we can build resilience. And it's the only way that you can earn this trust and credibility. Because if not, what we are doing is like hey, there is a disaster. We are here. We're here to give you food, money, food, medicine, water. But at the end, we're creating and perpetuating the concept of the charity program. You know, the state, the people just come, call the leaders. Okay, this is the food. No. We want to build resilience. So what we did is first, start to have a present conversation with them. Was a long process in which we have to know each of them, know the leaders, know the community leaders, attend to the HOA meeting, attend to the civic meeting, to the national night out, and also working with consulates. Here in Houston, we have, after Washington, we have more than 94 consulates. It's the biggest representation of consulate corp in USA after Washington. So we're working with them, using their channel of communication, you know, and to use their engagement, but to gather information to know where those meetings were, and to start to gather confidence, and start day by day earning this trust and credibility with those communities, specifically with newcomers, with tourists. Houston, for example, more than 50% of the population are Latinx. And there is a huge impact of those populations that they don't have a citizenship. And we don't care about it. We just care about the human being. But also, why? Because it was proven after Harvey back in 2017 that the most people that were most affected was the vulnerable population, the people with disability, the people with a sex and functional need, mental health, and the challenge to engage them is the only way to break up this challenge is through the credibility and building trust, and also showing them that we have information, resources to connect them, to empower them with the idea to make an environment, you know, in which they can earn, learn, and belong for community development. So it's a long process. But at the end, the outcome is great. Let me tell you that, for example, in the city, we have 24 plans. And now, for example, it's the first time back in Derecho 1 month ago, there was a huge storm as well here in Houston, Derecho, that affect the whole city. And we in fact, we did the first implementation of the STIR in Texas with this huge scope. At that time, we reached out through the STIR member almost, first we did robocalls, but then we start to do the physical calls. How we imagine we had a registration at that time of almost 2,500 people. So 2,500 people. How right away in the moment of disaster, you're gonna activate a call center, okay, with many city departments, but also with the community. So what we did at that time is when we did implementation, several leaders, several people of the community start to work with us in the call center, and we did all these calls. And after those calls, the people that were in good shape, okay, they were great, but the people that we couldn't reach out, we send the Houston Fire Department to do wellness check. And we are doing the same thing right now during Beryl. This time was fast. In 24 hours, we built a call center with the whole community, with different members of the communities affected, faith leaders, volunteers, that they trust in us. They believe in us. And why? Because when we created the plan, they were the leaders who were working in the creation of the plan. Of course, we have many emergency planners. We have different departments of the city, civic organization, universities that they were working in the creation of this plan, for example, and the implementation of the STEER. But at the end, the core was the community leaders that were working with us. And through this work, we earned this credibility. They trusted in us. And when nowadays, the hurricane came on Sunday, and we start to call all of them, hey, we need people, we need a lot of people. We have a list of STEER registrants that is over 3,000 people. How are we gonna do? So they shows up over here to the OEM. We build a huge call center, and we call in 24 hours 2,700 people in so many different languages. How we did it? Well, the consulates were here talking and doing the calls in Chinese, Vietnamese, projecting the information and the news release. You can see all this information in our website. And beside this, specifically in the neighborhood, all those leaders who speak Spanish or who speak Urdu, Pasto, they were helping us to make those calls in the call center. And we distribute different lists, taking into consideration the population of each neighborhood. For example, here in Houston, we knew that in Gulftown, Charlestown, this population has a lot of people from that speak Urdu and Pasto. So we assign people that speak those languages to make those calls in the call center. So at the end, what is the outcome? Well, the implementation, the call center, and the STEER implementation, at the end, what we did, in 24 hours, we did the 2,700 calls. And yesterday, we finished the wellness check in the field, and we visited about 600 families with the support of the Houston Fire Department, and because 600 families that we couldn't reach out through the physical call. So we sent the Houston Fire Department, and from these 600 families, most of them, thank God, they were okay. They had problem with the signal, but others, they were trapped. Others, they were flooded, and they couldn't reach out to the nearest community center. There were many seniors. There were many people with mental health conditions that they were isolated. And you know what I'm really proud now, that at least we did something different than Harvey, and it's proven with action. And honestly, I think that we are doing this is because we're working with the whole community approach, with diversity, equity, and inclusion. The whole community is involved during, before, and after, and the recovery part of our work. And I would like to send you a picture, and you can see our call center that we activated. So many people, many diversity, many languages, working for the same goal. Build resilience and support our community for community development. And this is the key. How we can do that? Okay, of course, with a good plan, with an strategy. But the core and the key was because we strive a lot every day, and this is my focus every day: build and earn this trust and credibility with my community.
Julian, thank you. Really, thank you too for that. Those real time, kind of lessons learned just from the last few days. That's amazing. And congratulations on all your hard work. Seemed to really pay off. Folks, I want to let you know I am watching the Q&A. There's some amazing comments and questions in there. I have a couple I wrote down that we'll get to in a little bit. But I want to go to Aaron. Aaron, do you have some concrete examples or two of the benefits you see in the field based on what you've done?
Sure. I think that there's a couple of examples that come to mind. One is looking, I kind of want to get into, I was looking at the chat too, in the Q&A, and the questions about how do you actually reach the community? We keep saying reach the community is important, reach the community. How do you actually reach the community? And coming back to what I said in the intro of us working with 850 different community organizations, part of what we do is just go into the community. I think AFN entities would probably look at us and think of, wow, we talked to the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. We got pretty deep into the community and reach, didn't we? All right, high five, good job. But the reality is when we look at our work, we then are working through another 850 different organizations within California because we don't do our work alone. We're not the authority on anything. We're a convener, and what we can offer is trust and credibility. And in doing that, really is an organization by organization approach. It's having something of value to offer. So during the pandemic, that was the thing of value that really was PPE, and we're grateful for the relationship we had with the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, that as the PPE supplies were coming into California, they were looking for their intermediary entities to be able to get PPE out into the communities in the same dynamic of shake and trust. So we became one, and then we started working with, I think at the time it was about 500 different entities. It wasn't 850. And with each of them, we would say, what do you want? How much do you need? How much can you get out? And we would fill the orders, they would send the PPE, and then people would get it. And that ended up in our tiny little entity getting out about 116 million pieces of PPE, but we didn't hand it out. We just were the people in the middle to say, okay, state, here we go, get it to us, and then we'll distribute it out. And it literally was the value of the individual 500 entities. So that's an example of how do people on this call find the other entities? It's finding those entities with a standing, a presence, a credibility in the community, and establishing your relationships with them and allowing them to be the go-betweens, the brokers. You have access to them, they have access to more, and allowing that network of connection to happen. Part of that is, so in doing that, is having something of value to offer. That can be material at times. It could just be information. It could be other types of resources that people need. But I think it's been mentioned before, you can't quite predict what people need, or you can't dictate what people need, but you can ask. Here's who we are. Here's what we have and can offer. What do you need? What would you like? And from there, beginning to build those relationships during the times that you need the friend. Dang it, Roxy, I'm going to mess it up again. By the time you need a friend, it's too late. Shoot. Okay, it's going to just, like there's the telephone game where it's passing person to person. This one's just reinterpreting in my own head as to what they are. Some of the pieces that I'd recommend is people with developmental disabilities. It's an interesting perspective to bring into this conversation, because oftentimes people have to have a level of trust. If you're coming into my home to get me out of bed in the morning, I have to trust who you are on the day-to-day basis. So individuals with developmental disabilities, I think generally have this really fantastic and powerful perspective of being very underestimated, and yet keenly honed on to figuring out who they can trust, knowing and reading who they can trust, because I need you to help me in my things, and I need to figure out how to work with you to make sure I get my needs met, which is an exercise in trust. But at the same time, having those coming in sort of underestimating their ability to read them, read their intentions, their motivation. So some steps: just show up, think you said, Ron, that's going to be the name of Roxy's book, Show Up. Next chapter in the book, Show Up Regularly. I'll add an addendum, or I'll contribute a chapter for the book called Listen. The next is actually make changes based on what you heard, and then follow up. You know, we're working together. We showed up regularly. We listened. We made some changes. How did it work? And be willing to adjust.
Aaron, we're going to write a book just based on y'all's quotes I've been writing down this whole time. And you gave me one just now, Aaron. You can't dictate what people need, but you can ask. I love it. And I have a fear, this is a different panel for different day, that at least for me during COVID and after, it's easier for them to make an assumption than ask a question. They don't like to call somebody and ask a question. They'd rather make an assumption and say that's good enough. And so Aaron, I hope more people take your advice on that one.
Ron, that's also part of AFN command and control structure culture. And the command and control is necessary to carry out these paramilitary operations that are disaster response and recovery. It's understandable, but it's also having awareness of the culture that AFN executives and resources are functioning in, and how that may contrast with really kind of a basic other tools that are right at people's fingertips and abilities. Ask.
Exactly right. So Amy, to you, do you have some concrete examples of what you've done and the benefits you've received?
Few that are coming to mind. I also just want to shout out a quote that I took from you, Julian, the earn, learn, belong, as the sort of outcome in community. Like, none of that is inherently disasters, right? It's about the things that we experience as members of our community on a regular basis. And I think paying attention to that, again, sort of getting outside of our own blinders of like, this is my goal, this is my work, and really asking, what are people experiencing? Like, I think that just has to be part of our motivation and our mindset when it comes to doing this work well. You know, some things that we've tried, going back to that idea of whole community preparedness, when you think about the number of times that, for instance, you do a tabletop or operational or even full-scale exercise with entities that are inherently response organizations, that's a level of experience and sort of understanding of how things are going to work during disasters that we don't always give the community. On a personal story, during the Ebola response in Sierra Leone, in all of West Africa, but in Sierra Leone, I briefly deployed as a health promotion specialist, which really the goal of my work at that time was to go to communities and ask, how is it that you take care of your health on a regular basis, and how has Ebola changed that? And what are the new barriers, the new resources that are critical? And I learned so much about the chapters that have already been named: Show Up, Listen, all of the things, but doing that again with folks who understood how to bring those questions to community in an engageable way. I think about needing to transcreate a lot of emergency conversations. So in Sierra Leone, we had the opportunity to work with the cultural and linguistic facilitators who, on blue sky days, so to speak, were working with the Peace Corps, and some of those, like, again, long-term relationships, long-term sort of projects of cultivating community capacity and resilience and everything, and letting them be the guides of how do we order questions? How do we frame community conversations in a way that pick up the energy and the interest of the communities that we're trying to talk to, was really, really critical, especially because, Aaron, as you were saying, sort of the paramilitary structures and mindset of emergency management are not what people encounter on a regular basis. Like, understanding that, you know, we have an incident command structure is all well and good, but how do I relate to it? How do I sort of come to understand what I'm going to experience in a point of dispensing, what I'm going to experience in a shelter environment? And coming back from that disaster response made me really interested in seeing how we could use training and exercise opportunities as emergency response entities to not just do operational exercises, but to do community education and feedback exercises. So a huge shout out to Veronica Moody and to the Rocky Mountain Medical Reserve Corps. But one of the things that we did during a full-scale exercise called, we were practicing emergency dispensing. In that case, it was about medicine, but I think it could have been very relevant to PPE and other things that people need in a situation where a whole bunch of people were getting sick at the same time. We don't know anything about that. But we did an exercise where the ask to the volunteers was to set up a point of dispensing environment, but then we invited people who are deaf or hard of hearing, people who were blind or had low vision, people who spoke languages other than English, including Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, others that were very prevalent in sort of the area of Colorado where this was being practiced, older adults. I think there was one other group and I'm blanking on it now. This was back a number of years. But basically what we tried to facilitate was the Are You Ready training to just sort of start talking about what does emergency preparedness look like for you and your communities? How does it work best? Given, you know, the resources and community connections you use on a regular basis, but then also let's walk through this point of dispensing environment and talk about what the goals are, but also like, how can we make this better? How can we improve this? And we got some really wonderful insight from people who are blind or low vision about like the textures of the floor and how you can sort of give people sort of greater guidance about how to navigate something if you change the sort of the floor sort of pathways that people are walking on, having, you know, environments where there's additional lighting, of course, you know, expanded and large font resources being available. But one of the best points of feedback was we were walking through with community members who spoke Vietnamese, and they were looking at the sort of directional signs, which the responders had leaned forward on sort of getting everything translated into languages that were familiar to the community. But they looked at the words and they were like, your sign for entrance says get in. Your sign for exit says get out. And we're like, oh, well, maybe can you give us some ideas about different ways to say this in Vietnamese that would feel a little bit more welcoming than get in and get out? And so like giving people, to go back to Erin, what you were saying, something of value. I think people really appreciated the chance to come together with people who had shared experiences with them to talk about, okay, what would we do in this sort of disaster environment? Just the value of convening and giving people some chances to talk about emergency preparedness in a non-threatening sort of like collaborative kind of way. Erin Titus always says, don't prepare alone, prepare together, and don't prepare for disasters, prepare for disruptions. And I think that really resonated with people. But they also got to see some very immediate applications of their feedback to sort of a community environment that they would encounter during disasters, of like changing the language or changing, you know, resources that were going to be available the next time that this Medical Reserve Corps like set up a point of dispensing. So like the intersection of both practicing operations for the response agencies that will be responsible for it, But if you're going to be sort of bringing resources around an exercise anyway, can you turn it into a community education and feedback opportunity too? Because I think when we needed to roll out vaccine clinics, when we needed to have sort of other versions of points of dispensing after that 2017 exercise, the community members who have their own sort of spheres of influence and connections and could relay the good efforts and learning that happened in that environment, and then note them the way that they changed the next time that a same sort of environment was needed, I do think helped to shift some of the trust, especially among the communities that they were a part of, and to sort of continuously be in dialogue with us about how we can make more plans, more disaster environments, more disaster settings be inclusive of the community that would be using them.
Amy, thank you. Now, Roxy, over to you for some concrete examples.
Hey, this is Roxy. So I'll go back to a little earlier and highlight something kind of related to that, and then I'll give you my example. Credibility is showing up. That seems to be our theme today, right? But it's also doing your homework. I can't show up in American Samoa or Hawaii or Guam and bring only what I know about my life, my opinions, my judgment, my daily living activities as my expectations of how people live and how to do business with each other. I hear people say all the time, and this is common in FEMA, they say we have to have cultural competency. I tell my teams, the staff that deploy out, that what we need to have is cultural respect. Competency is knowing, and respect is understanding. And it's a solid way for us to build trust and to help foster relationships. When I bring with me a true respect for the differences in culture, in practice, and in life. And I think, language is reality, and the words that we use have a big impact. So cultural respect instead of cultural competency is kind of how I like to express that. So it looks like showing up. It looks like taking the time to learn and to listen, not just to hear, to ask questions and really listen to the answers. Every community is different. They have different needs, different impressions of the government, different histories, different experiences, and different traumas. So credibility and trust is being honest and identifying also what we can do and what we can't do, and managing expectations. And that can be really hard for me. I hate saying no. It's the worst. I hate it. I try to adjust that to not no, but I can't do that, but this is what I can do, or here's who I can refer you to who might be able to help that. But managing those expectations and having those difficult conversations about seeing pathways that could lead to success, but not being allowed to personally walk them, or having, like I said, to provide referrals or even step aside and get my bureaucratic governmental junk out of the way so that people can make those processes. And it's about doing what you say you will, showing up. So given that, a recent experience that I had was in Guam last year. I was the disability integration advisor for the response to Typhoon Mawar. I started that event by calling and texting and checking in with my disability community partners as the storm was forming and as it was becoming clear that it was likely going to hit Guam. Understanding what they felt their gaps and shortfalls were, and doing my best to connect to individuals on the island and to resources that might be able to help them. I then boarded a military air flight and landed in Guam at 4 a.m, the day after Typhoon Mawar made landfall. Over the response and into the recovery, I was there with my partners, and we stood side by side, and we worked to help identify creative solutions and ways that we could provide more inclusive settings and services that meet people where they are in the most inclusive setting possible. We did things that we haven't done before, and a lot of that was through the trust that we had built over time, saying, yes, I could support that, and them knowing that I would show up, and them knowing that, it would work. And trust with my internal partners as well, saying, this is what we need to do. I know that it's going to take extra effort, but trust me, We have to do this if we're going to reach these populations. We partner with the Autism Community Organization in making a space where people could make an appointment for services, much like you would see
Oh,
at a
Roxy,
disaster recovery center.
So,
And they
sorry,
have
I lost you for a second,
trusted.
Roxy. Sorry, go ahead, keep going.
Oops, sorry about that.
That's
My
okay.
connection being weird.
You're back.
Okay. So Autism Community Center, where people were already comfortable and they had their families, already receiving services in this environment. The children are comfortable and they could make an appointment to come in and register, and the staff that they know is there and providing, care for their children while they're able to really get into and work through their registrations, and get updates or register with FEMA. It changed their ability to engage with the registration process and to be able to participate more effectively in the different processes that we have. When I left Guam months later after arriving, I told them I was going to come back and do some deep down work, because there's a number of things that happened during the response that there were gaps, there were shortfalls. That happens every time, right? Best laid plans. We do our best. I also tell my teams we're going to do everything we can, but we can't do everything, right? So, but we can do more of everything when we've pre-planned and participated with our community in that aspect. So I kept my word, and I returned to Guam about 6 weeks later, and I was able to work with local government and territorial partners to provide a platform for people with disabilities and the organizations that serve them to have a voice and to be able to speak their truths on the short and long-term impacts of not being included during disaster response and recovery. And a lot of times that's what trust is being able to say, if I go in and I tell my territorial partners, people weren't included, you have to do better, the shelter situation wasn't perfect, here's what you need to change. It doesn't give a voice. It doesn't allow a platform, and it doesn't build the connections of the community to those organizations. And so in providing that space for listening sessions, and providing very careful moderation to ensure that things didn't get overly heated, but that the message was received. We were able to build and establish a lot of credibility with the community because we took a step back and provided them an opportunity to participate in their own recovery, to participate in saying, this is what happened to me. These are the short and long-term impacts of what not being included means to me and my family and what happened. And the results, the response to that was huge. Our emergency management planning and logistics and operations people, they heard those stories. They saw the faces of their community members and the traumas that they experienced, and they made those changes. They made immediate changes to their disaster plans, to their sheltering, to communication access, to the way that messaging is going out. So over the multiple weeks that I stayed after returning and met with those individuals, they made those changes. And after I left 2 weeks later, there was another threat and another typhoon coming towards Guam. It did not hit Guam, but the level of inclusion and the level of capability had increased dramatically. I heard Amy say earlier, never waste a good disaster. That is exactly what we did in this particular instance. And I think, the most important part of that story is saying sometimes the best thing we can do is to take a step back and allow people the opportunity to speak with those individuals, and where they maybe didn't have the connection or the capability to do that on their own, providing that space and being supportive of that, and then taking that information a step further and continuing to work with it. You heard, so-and-so's story during the event. These are things I think we could do to make that not happen again. And if you're not capable of doing those things, what I heard from this partner was that they were able to support that. How can we help you to build a memorandum of agreement? So providing the platform and then showing up and taking it the step further and building upon what was spoken. Those honest commitments and conversations are credibility in action. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Roxy. So I'm going to apologize to all the amazing attendees who put comments and questions in. I think we have time for one that I'm going to grab that I wrote down from earlier. So again, I apologize for all the other questions we don't get to. But for the panelists, and you don't have to answer, if you want to answer, just kind of jump in. Here's an interesting one I found. Aaron, it builds off your comment about ask. We talked about that when you said you can't dictate what people need, but you can ask. And the question was around, how do you balance knowing you realistically can't provide the resources you need when you ask? So any of you want to take that one on?
Yeah, Ron, I think it's a great question, and hopefully my answer came through in the Q&A, which is Roxy builds on your statement about I don't ever want to have to say no. That's also a part of the culture of the work that we're in. We don't want to say no. We always want to say yes or find it. The reality is we can't. And if that reality creates a fear that builds into the barrier of even asking, then we got to acknowledge that and just blow it aside. It's okay to say, I can provide this to you. I can't provide this to you. I can try to get this for you. And let me connect you with somebody who may get this other thing that I can't get for you. The reality is the credibility is built in just being honest, clear, and transparent about what you can and can't do.
Love that. Completely agree. Anybody else want to comment on that? All right, I'm going to try to grab one of the other questions that I liked. This is, again, this is kind of a tough one, I think, but so the whole community, the term whole community, has turned into rhetoric that we all use and few understand. Can any of you comment on this as it relates to trust? So the term whole community, few people understand it. Everybody's using it nowadays in all kinds of emergency management documents. Can you all comment on how do you implement that? How do you get to trust? Amy.
Yeah, this is Amy. I think the only way to make something more than rhetoric is to make it tangible. And in some ways, I think it goes back to Aaron's comment that, like, what are you bringing of value? And sometimes it's related to the role and responsibility that you have, because again, we have to sort of act within the bounds of our limitations, within the scope of our funding and everything. But I think continuously asking, if we are really invested in whole community, how have we demonstrated that by the way that we do use our resources? Sadie's ism that always comes to mind is, show me your budget, I'll show you your values. And building into, really prioritizing, if you want the whole community voice, how are you resourcing them to participate? Having budget lines for accommodations at meetings, having budget lines for, stipends or inviting people to participate in sort of those preparedness spaces that some of us have jobs that sort of allow us to be there and present because our salaries cover it, and those that don't have greater barriers. How are we thinking about, really asking who is doing the work and getting creative about moving funding that often has a lot of strings attached to it, has sort of intended recipients, and asking the question, is there a way to move this into the hands of the people who need additional resources to do the work? Like, I think that's, when I think of whole community preparedness, a big question I always ask is, who's getting the money to do this and who's being asked to do this, just out of interest to the community? And is there any way for us to sort of balance that more, especially in the way that we do engagement and we do ask people for their time and thoughtfulness and input? We should show that in the resources we put aside for it, and we should definitely show it in what has already been said about showing outcomes and changes that happen as a result of their participation.
Thank you. And Amy, you just started talking about this. This is actually a term you brought up earlier. I'd be interested in any panelist who wants to talk to this one. Do we really have the capacity today to properly plan for whole community and AFN concerns? I'm talking about the system writ large. Do we have the capacity? How's that for a setup?
My expression just be my answer. Ron, what are you talking about? What do you mean, do we have the capacity? We don't not have the not capacity to do it. I don't know what the right double negative phrasing
Sure.
that is, but there's
Sure.
not a choice. There is not a choice.
Love it. To me, it kind of went back to the funding that Amy talked about. Are we funding the right line items? You know,
Okay, I want to say something that is in no way reflective with any organization or even role that I am associated with. I wonder sometimes what the impact would be of ensuring that every single dollar that goes out from any government entity. I know a lot of it flows from federal down, but there's other sort of like mechanisms at lower levels too. But if every single dollar that went out had an assumption of, if you are an essential service, if you are something, a critical function of our community on a regular basis, then you have a responsibility to be thinking about your emergency preparedness and sustaining the services and care that you offer, even when a bad day comes. There's a lot of mechanisms that are encouraging that now. There are a lot of mechanisms that are, but I wonder sometimes if we have struck an imperfect balance in the professionalization of emergency management versus sort of the whole mindset of like, when you think about continuity, when you think about sustainability, any of those words that like to speak to, right, the long-term need for whatever it is that you offer to your community. Have you thought about shocks and impacts to whatever it is that allows you to do what you do on a regular basis, as part of that understanding of continuity and sustainability? And have we put structures or sort of like funding standards in place that sort of help to do that? So there's my dream, my soapbox for something that I'm not in any way authorized or a decision maker to make happen. But I think capacity, absolutely. I think there's a wonderful book called Empowerment by the Taylors that talks about human capital. Fundamentally, we are all here. We could all do this. But have we been given access to resources and access to sort of like the understanding of responsibility and mindset to say that, yes, we will do this?
Roxy, did you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of go along with what Amy was saying. There are requirements federally for funding to be utilized in that way, but there has yet to be a real accountability for that to happen, right? And so, yeah, there's absolutely the capacity. There's even the requirement, but it's not always, it doesn't always take precedence. In emergency management, so often we go out and what we hear from people is, or from emergency managers, I have to help the most people first, and then I'll get to those people. And what they fail to recognize is that if we build for the person with the greatest need, more often use those services, right? If you read English, you can read English large print, but not everyone can read the small print English. So why are we still making 2 copies, right? And so that's the kind of understanding, that universal design and that universal impact that we try so hard in all of the trainings and different opportunities we have to really impress upon people so that they have a better opportunity to be reaching people and to meet that level of accountability. Sometimes it's hard to tell people they have to. We get more out of things like in Guam, allowing people the opportunity to personalize the information. And so when we talk about capability or capacity to do things, we have the capability, but we have to find a way to reach people in a meaningful way that makes them want to change the way that they're doing things. And so, when I think about capacity, when I think about capability, I think about my responsibility to personalize this information and all of our responsibility to bring those individuals together so that, you need to build inclusively for people with disabilities becomes a person and not just me saying something or a legal, person from the office being like, well, legally you have to. It doesn't inspire people to want to do that work. So.
Thank you, Roxy. All right, panelists, so we're down to kind of some closing remarks. Roxy, I was going to kick it back to you first. And any last closing remarks you want to make?
I'll keep it super brief because I know we're kind of short on time and my connection's being really strange. Just to remember, highlight, to show up, to build that capacity, to build those relationships.
Oh,
And to understand that trust is that two-way street. I think I lost you. Am I
nope, you're
back?
back. We got you now.
Sorry about that. The
That's
connection
okay.
just kind of trucks in and out sometimes. I was just saying it's a two-way street, and to remember that we have to give to be able to take. And again, for Aaron, when you need a friend, it's too late to make one. So it's never too late to begin the process of building those relationships and coordinating with people. And it's okay to make it personal. And that's one of the ways that we can establish trust, is by making it personal and by bringing our personal stories, backgrounds, and passions to the work that we do every day. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Roxy. Amy, any last remarks?
I think for those of us that sit within sort of the established systems of emergency management right now, my encouragement is just to ask, how have we incorporated people-centered information into our plans, into our thinking and operations? And, I think emergency management as a whole started really from the mindset of like, let's deal with the hazard. And then we figured out after that like, oh, the impact of the hazard on our infrastructure means that we have to have all of these capacities. I think the next important, realization of what emergency management can do as a public service to community is to say, disasters don't happen in a vacuum. They happen to communities who have extraordinary resilience and repertoire for figuring out how to deal with disruptions on a regular basis. We need to leverage it. We have communities who experience extraordinary disparities and lack of access. And we can do something different in emergencies because everything's disrupted anyway. And the sort of using disasters as a crucible moment to say, not only can we do the next disaster better, we can maybe even think about doing community better by strengthening that social fabric, by really understanding what it is that affects people's own efficacy and behavior and ability to support one another, because we do need to be able to leverage the whole community's resilience, not just the resilience of an emergency management field. So put, human-centered information, human-focused data and practice and everything back into the center of what we do in emergency management.
Thank you. Aaron, any closing remarks?
Thanks, Ron. I'd love to summarize or end by just talking about a lot of great successes that we've done, but I think it's really more instructive to talk about some of our failures, the State Council on Developmental Disabilities, and what do we do about them. Three quick examples. One is that we have people with developmental disabilities to train other people with developmental disabilities on emergency preparation. So peer-to-peer training, that's great. The training ends with, now go get a go kit, and here's a checklist of all the things you need in a go kit. That idea is great. The reality is not, as most people we're talking to, or at least from my own experiences growing up, we didn't have two of anything to rub together to make a go kit. So we got that feedback. You're telling us to go do something, we can't. So then we went and got grants with the American Red Cross and the California Community Foundation, so that when we're providing information, we're also now able to hand people a go kit with all the items they need. There's one example of learning from our mistakes. Another is making sure we're getting good information out to families about upcoming wildfires or emergency power outages, and families saying, thanks for this information that we're going to need to evacuate, but my adult brother, anywhere we evacuate, his autism, his sensory needs are so high, he's going to be dysregulated, he's going to destroy any place that we're in. Can you provide us some durable accommodations? That phrase, durable accommodation, I never heard it before, and it's a perfect one. She's like, I need a hotel room where the toilet can't be pulled apart and thrown, that nothing can be thrown through a window, the pieces on the wall and the TV can't be removed. Do you have anything like that? No, we don't. But listening, we're able to create a partnership to meet this family's needs, to find a place where they can evacuate to a facility, not a hotel, actually a day program that's going to be durable. Another one is that we're telling families in the Central Coast area that get involved. And they're like, what do you talk? Where do I get involved? Where do I get involved? And we realized those forums didn't quite exist. So out of our San Jose Central Coast area, they started facilitating conversations with people with developmental disabilities, their family members. And a lot of the key entities who are on this call today, including Vance Taylor, Office of Emergency Services, Red Cross, the independent living centers, the volunteer orgs active in disasters, to begin those conversations, those planning. So even those places where we think we're doing a great job, we always have more to learn, to change, to alter, and do if we listen. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Aaron. Great examples. Julian, any closing remarks? Oh, you're on mute, Julian. $1 in the jar.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, I muted because I was receiving another call. Yeah, I think that in our work in emergency management, it always is a work in progress. There is no a one solution. There is no a one strategy. It's a work in progress, especially because we're facing natural disaster and man-made disaster. But the natural disaster, they impact every time in a different way. And in a different way. So we're learning in the process that every disaster happens. And at the same time, we're creating plans. At the same time, we're building resilience. And at the same time, we're growing. We're learning and working with the community. I was reading a couple of questions in the chat. The attendants are amazing. I really like, they're really critical and provide suggestions. I really like. And some of them, they speak, for example, like the concept of the whole community approach. I just want to close with a couple of things. The whole community approach, the only way to ensure the whole community approach is when you connect with the whole with the diversity, with equity, with diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not that you're gonna bring everyone to the table. Because the idea is to remember that the disaster starts locally and ends locally. So we have to go to the neighborhood. Once we identify the disaster that impact, identify the need, the mitigation, then the need, the asset, the strength, also the vulnerabilities, and through that, we can ensure that we have plans, and through that, we can start to identify through the asset-based community development, as I said before, identifying the leaders, the stakeholders, the university, creating a power map of in each neighborhood to develop, an emergency plan accordingly with their needs, and an emergency plan that represents the diversity of this community. Because as I said before, each community is different. If I go to the north of Houston, the priority is flooding, but if I go to the east of Houston, the priority is air pollution. It's totally different. So you cannot come to the same speech to like a something standard. It changed totally, even in the same city. And we have to take in consideration always, the people with disabilities, access and functional needs, involving them, involving the stakeholder, the organization, the father and mother who has people with neurodiverse pathologies, because each of them, they will have something to provide. And as long we create those different groups and we participate or encourage to create those groups to build leadership and resilience, we can keep growing and filling in with new updates and new ideas, our programs, emergency plans, before, during, and after disaster. So my suggestion is like how we can create whole community approach, well, with diversity, equity, and inclusion, breaking the language barrier, building credibility, but it's a work in progress every day, because you can be working, with different organizations for a year, but if something happened that change, the engagement, you have to start again. So you have to have a plan that brings sustainability, being honest, realistic. For example, in our case, we talk with being honest with the community. Like for example, we have the state of Texas Emergency Assistance Registry, and we encourage the whole people to register, but it doesn't mean like we're coming for you right away. And we let them know, like, hey, if the cavalry is not coming for you, that was my presentation as a speaker in the Texas regional conference 1 month ago in Fort Worth. If the cavalry is not coming, what we can do? So the only way that we can do to face those situations is with build a resilience, with community preparedness, but also involve all our stakeholders, our community in all our plans. So when the time comes over in which we have to work in the response, our community will be prepared, our leaders will be engaged, and they will separate the egos, and they will be focused in the response, and also our universities, our stakeholders, people, they will be like taking into consideration their skill, their willingness to participate in the recovery and the response actions of our plans. And
thank you very much, Julian. I appreciate it. I think our time's up. Panelists, you all were amazing. And I realized we skimmed the surface. Again, amazing Q&A going on. If we had another 5 hours, we probably could have covered it all. Sadie, over to you.
Yes, thank you. What an amazing, incredible panel. And I've had the privilege to meet a few of you, and I work a lot and sync up with Amy on a regular basis. But nice to see you all, Julian, Roxy, all of you. All right. Julian, if I could have you turn off your camera, and Roxy, you as well. Thank you all. All right, well, we are now ready to go into our closing keynote address, and then after that, we will have our conclusion and close remarks from all of your organizers. But right now, I would love to introduce Andrew Berk, who is the ADA coordinator for the Office of Equal Opportunity and Diversity, University of California, Irvine. So if you would like to know more about his bio, you can find it here, and I just dropped it into the chat. All righty, thank you all, and off to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Sadie. And my last name is actually Berk. So my job is to take all the wonderful things that we've talked about over the past 2 days and give it and provide guidance on where do we go from here? How do we use all this great knowledge that we can? I'm going to start by describing myself. I am a person who uses a wheelchair and has a disability. I am bald, so I look like Mr. Clean from those 90s commercials with a dress shirt on. I don't think he could ever pull off formal wear like I could. And in the background of my screen is the logo for the University of California, Irvine, which is where I currently work as the Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator for both the campus and our health system. all of this will become relevant as I talk. Why did they pick me? And the answer is simple. It was all Vance Taylor's fault. And unfortunately, I can't post his email in the chat, but you know where to find him to send your complaints there. In 2016, I was in a different job. I had just started doing more outreach to the community. And I don't even remember how this happened, but I ended up getting a call from Vance saying, hey, we're having this access and functional needs conference. Why don't you be on the opening panel? And I sat there and said, great, this is a great idea, awesome. And I get off the phone and I realized I had no clue whatsoever about emergency planning. And by the way, this is the first time Vance is hearing this. So what I did over the next week and a half was I read all the cases and settlements at the time. Full disclosure, I am an attorney. And I expect the attendance to drop by 90% now that I've said that. But the law was my knowledge base for getting into this field. And I go there and I give a presentation that was really informative, but looking back in retrospect was boring as all get out because I didn't touch on the personal aspect, all the things that the panelists that you just heard stress about talking to the community, hearing their needs, saying things that are emotionally convincing and not just legally convincing. I decided not to stop there. I became heavily interested in accessible emergency planning. And about 5 years later, I ended up doing this work as the EDA coordinator here at UCI. Why am I telling you this story? Because we just talked about whole community in emergency plan. In order to have whole community, you need more people with disabilities, not just as community partners, but as emergency preparedness and service is professional. We are already there. Hi, I'm one of them, and a lot of the perspectives that we're looking for, a lot of the insight that you can only get by talking to a community member is multiplied by tenfold when the person doing the planning, doing the coordination also has a disability. So get more of us. I am no stranger to emergencies. I'm actually formerly quite accident prone. And I want to take you back to 2010. I was living in Fresno. It was a momentary lapse of judgment and combined with just getting lost. But there was one night when I fell in my apartment and I needed to call 911. So the ambulance came and got lost and then came back 10 minutes later because my assistant stood outside my house waving his arm, and they put me on a standard gurney. Now, you can't see this because of the way my camera is positioned, but I rely heavily on straps to keep me still. My disability means that I move a lot, and those straps keep me from hurting myself, someone else, or damaging property. So they had me on the screen, and of course, I couldn't take my assistant in the ambulance. So they're about to wheel me away, and I said, hey, I'm gonna need tied down. And they look at me like I've just asked them to strip naked and dance in front of a moon, because they don't do that. And they said, our policies say we can't do this. And I said, look, I'm not going to stay on this journey if you don't tie me down. And they were still hesitant. And typically my assistants do not speak for me. But I was so out of it at this point and injured that my assistant looked at them and said, look, you're going to put him in there, and all the things in your ambulance are going to go flying if you do not tie him down. And they stopped a second. They said, hold on. And one of them called their supervisor, and I only heard one side of the conversation, which was, hello, sir. Yes, we're with a patient, and he's on a gurney, and he wants us to tie him down. Pause. Yes, he really wants us to tie him down. He says he's gonna move a lot. There's a couple more minutes of hushed conversation. And the guy comes back and he says, we're going to tie you down. We just have to document it. So somewhere in somewhere in the records of that ambulance company is an intake form with the words written all over it. Patient wanted to be tied down. And if anyone out there is in Fresno and can get me a copy of that form, I want to frame it. But that wasn't the end. We got in the ambulance, and the paramedic is going through my wallet to get my insurance card, and he sees my California state attorney ID. He's like, "Oh, you're a lawyer. What do you specialize in?" And I was feeling kind of cheeky that night, so I looked in and I said, "Malpractice." And he got a lot nicer after that. But I used that to break the ice. And by the time we got to that ER, they were listening to me. They were working with me. And let me tell you, it was a long night. But what was really cool was every couple hours I'd hear, "Hi, Andrew," and it would be the same paramedics coming in to drop somebody off. We had a great time together. But what we really did was we worked together to make the system meet the person, not the other way around. I've seen all kinds of systems, not just emergency management, oftentimes demanding that people with disabilities adapt themselves to the needs of the agency administering the program. In disability, there is no one size fits all. It only works when you take the individual circumstances into account, and you say, "Okay, here's our goal. How are we going to be flexible in getting to that goal? What things are we willing to do differently?" And they might be things that you've done the same way for decades. But we are all here because we want to save lives. And I have incredible faith that everyone on this call has can turn that dedication into collaboration with the person with the disability to get them to a safe place with the same access to services as everyone else. Now, all of this experience has informed me in my current job. one of my biggest focuses is on emergency planning and, and services and making them accessible. I am not alone. Excuse me. I am not alone. The first day or the first week I got to UCI, I went out and I found the emergency manager. And I sat down with him. I said, "We gotta work together." And 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 did I mention that this was all Vance's fault? I'm gonna say that again because one of the things I asked him was, "Do you know Vance Taylor?" He's like, "Yeah, I used to work for him." And that connection solidified the bond that we already started to make. Now, we recently did a mock wildfire exercise, and we specifically included a scenario where a user with a disability needed to be evacuated by paratransit. And we were, of course, contracted with a vendor to provide this service. So we got a really cool volunteer. He was actually my intern at the time. And he went to the designated place. He called the phone number he was supposed to call. And by the way, the company had full notice that this was going to happen. So we weren't pulling a fast one on them. He called, they came, they got lost. And by the way, if this sounds familiar, it's because it is. Except instead of coming back, they left for a couple hours. Now, had this been a real emergency, a real wildfire, that volunteer would be seriously hurt or dead, unfortunately. But here's the really great part about this story. I was on a call the next day with the emergency management team, and they were giving a summary of the exercise, and they said the word paratransit, and this was a large group meeting, so I was not going to air the dirty laundry in front of 50 people. So I just raised my hand and said, we should talk about this after. And my colleague Vanessa Flores looked at me and said, "Andrew, and said,
Drew, we lost your audio.
Sorry about that. Um, so Vanessa Flores looked at me and said, Andrew, you don't have to worry about that. We've already fired that vendor. And we're gonna get a new one. Now, they did that without any involvement by me. They got it done. That meant I was successful. When I didn't need to be standing right there for someone to address an accessibility issue. And it's also a takeaway for this conference. When you do this, it is not going to be perfect. You are going to run into some very interesting situations that seem horrible at the time and great stories that you laugh at 10 years later. And that is okay. This is a relatively new collaboration between people who work on disability issues and people who work on emergency planning. And I can tell you, there's not much guidance anywhere. The important thing is that accessibility is a journey and not a destination. And if you can walk away from one of those really not so good things and learn from and you still have the same attitude coming into it, which is, we're going to make this work. That's fine. Bill Clinton used to say it's the economy, stupid. I always say it's the relationship, stupid. And the mindset. As long as you keep that mindset, you're going to be fine. Finally, I wanted to hold myself up out to you as a resource. I believe my contact info is on the biography page. If not, I'm in the UCI directory. And we are all in this together. So if you need help, if you want advice, if you want to just bounce ideas off each other, I'm there. We support each other. I'd like to thank everyone. And Sadie, do we take questions or do we just all go home now?
This is Sadie. No, we don't just go home right now. And we did have Q&As in there and didn't have many questions that came in for you.
Yeah.
But you are good. You're good to go. And we are so grateful that you were able to come here and share your story and your expertise.
Okay.
I'm now gonna hand this over to Anne Marie to start our closing remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are not hearing you, Anne Marie, just in case.
Wait, what?
It's to Anne Marie.
Oh, sorry.
There you come. We just need you to raise your volume. Yep, raise your volume a little.
Is this better?
No.
Andrew, you can go ahead and turn your camera off.
Oh, Andrew, you could go ahead and turn your camera off. There you go. Thank you. And Amory, your camera went off.
Sadie, if the audio isn't working, I can just pass it off to you.
You're
It's
good to
working?
go. You're
All
good
right.
to go.
Well, thank you everybody for your patience, and thank you, Sadie. What an incredible 2 days. Inspiring keynotes, informative panels. The National AFN Symposium is now in its 3rd year, and it's given us such an opportunity to reflect and refine on our, no? Okay, Sadie, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Yeah, we could hear you, but very, very low.
I apologize.
Captioning was able to hear you, and others were, captioning was able to hear you. We were following along with that.
I don't know what's wrong, so why don't you go ahead and
You're good now. All righty.
are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll keep going then. It's such a special place. We've shared links, the trainings, apps, reports, other resources, all will be provided afterwards. We've shared operational guidance, how to create alerting and communication, how to procure accessible technology. We've shared our personal stories and heard so many moving stories. We've learned new helpful phrases. When you need a friend, it's too late to make one. I like what Roxanne said earlier, that this work is about showing up. Showing up can be challenging, though. It's humbling even. It involves listening and learning, and very often not having all the answers. Admittedly, whole community really is a big concept. To me, whole community is about not excluding anyone. And it's inclusion beyond words, beyond rhetoric, making sure everyone has access. Saw some political discourse in the Q&A earlier. Politics has never been more divisive. I like to think of our work, though, as unifying. There's so much for everyone to agree upon. If we care about our communities and protecting everyone, then this is our work. Thanks to everyone here for showing up and for showing up in the days to come. There's much work to be done, and as Andrew Berk just said, we're all in this together. We look forward to working with you. Thank you. Thank you, Sadie.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Thank you. And for me, I want to thank you all for for spending your valuable time with us, for trying to come here and seek to understand. We're all here. We're all a bunch of good people trying to do our best. And we may not always agree. That is true. However, being able to listen, and I loved how I'm also going to echo what Roxy said earlier. Competent is knowing and respect is understanding. I also heard that in a way that it said when you're tokenizing, if you're feeling tokenized, it's when you're only at the table but you don't have a voice. But when you are included, your voice is being shared and heard as well. And so I don't know if I know that having a voice at the table and also being at the table makes a difference in everything that we're doing. I also like to always end a lot of my trainings with my life quote and how I also hold myself accountable. I know that Roxy shared a lot of her great quotes as well, and many of you shared quotes even in the chat and the Q&A. I really appreciate that. Those all will be shared. Also, I want to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded, and so we will be sending out that stuff out, and I'm sure Vance will also remind you of that. One of our sponsors is also my role as the Access and Whole Community Inclusion Caucus Chair for the International Association for Emergency Management. I would like to send a big shout out to them for being a great sponsor, a great partner. And also, if you are interested in attending this year's the 2024 annual conference at the International Association for Emergency Management, it will be here in my hometown. It is Colorado Springs, Colorado, November 15th through the 21st. Information is in the chat. And I will conclude this with, of course, another quote from my guidebook, and then also my life quote. But this one is, surround yourself with good people. But the yeps on the steps, they're great fun to have around. And so are many, many other friends that I have found. So that is from the Walk It in My Pocket. And I want to say thank you all for being great friends. Thank you all for sharing those wonderful, valuable resources. Thank you for your time. And now I leave you with my life quote. And I hope that when I share this, this becomes something you'll think about when you're doing the work that you're doing. And that is, to not know and do nothing about it is forgivable. To know and do something about it is admirable. But to know and do nothing about it is unforgivable. So now we've shared, now we've learned from each other. Now go out there and do something about it. With that, I'll hand this over to Vance.
All right. Thank you so much, Sadie. Appreciate it. And thank you to everybody. I mean, thank you so much to our speakers, our panelists, our moderators. So much information, so much learning. It's for me, it's been like drinking from the fire hose in a really good way. And thanks so much to all the attendees. It's been phenomenal to see your feedback, to see the questions. Please note that any of the resources that we're talking about, we're going to compile all of those links. We're going to put them in a post-event package and we're going to send it out. We're also going to take your questions. Anything that didn't get answered, we'll get a response. We'll include that in our post-event package as well as an evaluation. And just a copy of the recording, transcript, links to YouTube. You're going to get all of it. So thank you so much. I'll close. I think there's been a sort of an experience that I had that's been on my mind as I've thought about things over the last 2 days and what we're talking about. So I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy when I was a child. And I remember the first doctor we went to, we had the diagnosis, but we didn't know what that meant. And we went, and this doctor looked at my mom and said, Mrs. Taylor, your son won't graduate high school. College will be an impossibility. He will live at home and rely on your care for the rest of his life. So for your sake and his, keep your expectations low. And that was devastating. I was 7 years old. And that was his prognosis for my life. And so, remember, we got home and my mom said, look, as smart as that man is in terms of education, he's a total knucklehead. He doesn't know you. He doesn't know your strengths, your capabilities, your determination. You are going to decide how far you go. But understand, you're going to have to push through people like that man in order to get where you want to go in life. We changed doctors, went and saw a new specialist, and I'll never forget the way I felt like he truly saw me. He said, yeah, Vance, your body is going to have these challenges and you're going to use a wheelchair. So let's think about how you can go about achieving your goals. Let's think about how we start to use your mind in ways that gets you where you got to go. Let's make sure that you're not limited by anything in life. And I remember thinking, that feels right. That feels like somebody who knows, cares, and wants me to succeed. And as an adult, what it makes me think about is that we can approach the same problem in completely different ways. we can look at the issue of integration and inclusion, and we can see it as this challenge that's limiting. We can see it as something that cannot be overcome. We can see it as something that we can do nothing about. We can see this diagnosis and come up with a grim prognosis. Or we can choose to see that there's value in bringing individuals with lived experience and diverse backgrounds to the table. That we become stronger as we work together, and that we're capable of achieving these goals if and when we do that in partnership. And so, again, we can look at the same challenge, take a different approach to it, and for me, that changes the whole outcome. I want to thank all of you for being of that mindset that we can come through this together, for taking the progress that we've made and committing and recommitting to take it even further, to pushing it forward in a way that raises safety, security, independence, and dignity for all of us. That's how we make it matter. Thank you for making it matter. I will leave you now with a sincere thanks for being here. Thanks, Sadie and Anne-Marie. Thank our moderators or speakers. Thank Big City Emergency Managers and the Red Cross. And know that we're working together to do good things. Be well, be safe. We'll see you next year. Take care.